we'd like to welcome back our guest director this evening, Mr. Juliano Salgado. As people are getting situated, we're welcome to take any questions. I will be circulating with the microphone. We'd ask you please speak into the mic.
Yeah, so we'll start with questions. I guess it's the easier way.
Right up here.
Mine is just a small question, but I want to begin by thanking you for a wonderful film. This is the second time I've seen it, and it was more amazing the second time around, so congratulations. My small question is, what happened with Rodrigo? I was intrigued about learning about something about his infancy, and I wondered till the end what happened with the rest of his life.
Actually, Rodrigo is doing really well. He's a painter, and that's the one thing that actually I forgot to put in the film, at the end of the film.
I've been wondering.
We should have a shot of Rodrigo planting a tree, and that would be perfect. And actually, he did plant trees, and Rodrigo is alive and well. He paints. He's a very talented painter, and still lives with our parents, and he's doing really well. The editing of this film was quite an experience, and by the end of it, I forgot that. That's the detail. So if you see the DVD, there is a bonus in the DVD, with all of that. But I just realized too late.
Question on the end of the aisle.
One of the main topics of the film is how deep was touched your father, but for all the social situations that he had to see. And my question is, which was the social impact that the photos had? For example, I want to know which circles saw the pictures, if they appeared in newspapers, or which movements or political movements initiated. Yeah.
So if I understand well, the question is about how Sebastian was touched by all these events, and what role did the picture play, if they did play any.
Yeah.
Right. So actually, Sebastian was I think it's changed now, but from most part of his career, he was a photojournalist. So he would go to places to document events. And at this point in the history of news, photography would bring the proof that something had happened, and that's what Sebastian's job was. But actually, of course, he did it in a very different way, or in a way that's really his own. And that's what started, the idea of making this film. I felt, actually, right at the beginning, that if ever I had to make a movie about my father, about Sebastian, it had to be about the witness, the person who had seen so much, and in a way that was so humane, and there was so much every time he came back from his trip that he was going to say about all these events that he had seen, the people he had met. And so I knew there was much more to Sebastian than just the photographies, that actually, as his career progressed, they got even more and more broadly publicized. So I grew up in France, as it sounds probably, at first his photography would actually be exposed into Catholic medias. That's where he started. Sebastian flew away from Brazil, and he was an activist against the dictatorship in the young working class Catholic youth. I don't know if we have that in USA. But. And then he came to Europe, and as it is said in the film, became a photographer after he was an economist. And so naturally the first medias that were publishing his photographies were those Catholic medias. But very quickly it expanded, and he became a good professional, entered, good photography agencies, and started, selling his work all over. His main work, the work that let's say had the most impact on society, at least on French society, was the work about Ethiopia. And that's actually when I got to realize that my father really was playing a role, you know, and had something, you know, had a function to achieve, or his photographies were playing a function. And at this point of Ethiopia, his photographies were published in France, in the front page of very important newspapers such as Libération, which it was one of the major newspapers in France, and were publicized, you know, with entire books. And from then on, you know, his photographies were broadly publicized on media, actually on newspapers. Yep.
So I have a two-part question. First of all, that would help. Thank you. So I want to ask you about how your father chose to capture these massive human crises and the magnitude of those balanced with the individual suffering of each person. And secondly, how you chose to capture him capturing this balance, I guess.
So I think Sebastian did it in a very natural way, right? When he travels, he's always integrated in community. He travels on his own. He spends a lot of time with the people that he's going to photograph, and actually gets assimilated, integrated in the communities. So very quickly, Sebastian is not only photographing an event that he's going to illustrate or report on. He's also photographing there's a relationship that's established between him and the people that he's photographing, that he met, who he is with. And I think his natural talent is to put the camera in a place where he can record the emotion that he's feeling at the time. So there's something about those photos that's also about the emotion that he's feeling and the intimacy that's created between him and the person that he's photographing. So it goes beyond, you know, just the fact-checking photography. There's something else that's really important, I think, is the horizontality that comes from it. He's not coming to show to us, you know, people from a rich country or a developed country, how poor people live, or, you know, the exoticism of poverty. You know, he's really trying to show the people for what they are, people, and through that relationship. So the way he always traveled, I think and the way he photographed was always very natural, you know, in that he was photographing those relationships. From Ethiopia on, I think Sebastian understood that his photo could play a role, that he not only would inform the audience that would watch the news magazines or newspapers, it was also allowing the stories of people that were most of the time the forgotten people from history to have a voice, to be able to speak out and tell their stories and have their stories heard. And so I think it was actually, you know, having this double function through his photographies, and this is what makes him go to a lot of, you know, places in crisis. He doesn't only do that, you know, for his migration or during the workers series. He's doing also all sorts of non-crisis, let's say, situation for a long time. But when he goes to these places where terrible things are happening, I think he generally thinks that somehow he can help, you know, bringing the information, but that plays on both sides of the information. I don't know if that answers the question. Now about the way we did the interviews, right? Actually, that's a longer story. I directed this film with Wim Wenders, who is a great filmmaker. And when Wim came on board, he actually came because Sebastian and I, we had a conflictuous relationship. It was difficult for us to chat, you know, without, you know, starting a fight after a few, you know, sentences. And so it made it very difficult for me to interview him, right? So I knew, I had been thinking a lot. We had started traveling and then getting closer, and I realized Sebastian was a great witness. There was a lot of humanity in the way he had witnessed the world. He had a lot to share. There was a lot to learn from what he had seen and learn from the people he had met. But also at some point I realized that the story of Sebastian had gone, you know, through a complete arc of going all the way, you know, as far as his way of seeing the world and portraying it could bring him to. to a point of no return and having to reinvent himself. And in this, I realized at some point that was not only a beautiful thing to share, but that was also a story that could fit into a format for cinema, right? So that's when I set up to make a film, a real film. And at this point, I really had to meet with someone who could help me do this film, speak with Sebastião, because of the nature of our relationship. And luckily, Wim Wenders was around, and he's one of the greatest filmmakers. He's an amazing, really amazing documentary filmmaker. And he proved it during the making of this film. Although we knew what Sebastião had to speak about, we didn't know how we're going to make it. So we started with Wim and Sebastião speaking around the table and speaking about, the photographies that Sebastião was showing Wim with. I think there were 3 cameras in front of them, a camera behind everyone, another one, over the shoulder, and the sound engineer trying to catch, whatever sound would come out of, Wim's or Sebastião's, mouth. And that was very unsettling. It was a heavy setup, and things weren't working. And Wim had this genius, this amazing intuition, and his idea was that we had to bring Sebastião into a studio, as Sebastião was isolated into this little between black wrap, so black curtains, and he was isolated from the team. He couldn't see or listen to us or hear us. And between 2 of those curtains was the camera. And in front of the camera lens, there was a stainless mirror. So Sebastião couldn't see the camera either, he could only see the mirror. And what Wim did, that was an amazing idea, was that he would only project the photography into this mirror, see-through mirror, and he would just switch from photography to photography. And Sebastião would be confronted with those images that he had taken and brought back. He has an amazing capacity of abstraction, brought back into those moments. And it was not interviews, it was just recollection. And so this whole thing works, and it's a very powerful tool in cinema. It works as a subjectivity, tool. You get to enter, into Sebastião's journeys 40 years after they happened, through what he saw, through the photographies, but also through his memories and through his very subjective recollection of these memories. And this played wonderfully well during the interviews, and that's what you see here. And as a matter of fact, in some of those moments, especially in Rwanda, when it's so hard, it's almost not edited. It's real time because it was so hard. Because going back to those places would draw Sebastião back into this terrible. I mean, it's terrible. So it was going to be very, very short. This is how powerful this idea was from Wim. So this is mainly what Wim wrote during the shooting, but which is enormous, really.
In the
So
back
this is
row.
how we did it.
Juliano, we have a question in the back row.
Just a quick question. First of all, congratulations on an absolutely brilliant documentary about a fascinating man, your father. Question is, how was making this documentary, was it transformative in your relationship as father and son? And your mother also plays a very powerful role behind the scenes. Did it change? Was it transformative? How does he feel about the documentary now?
Well, for Sebastião, watching this film is a very emotional experience. I don't know if he's been able to watch it entirely. He's very touched by it. Lelia's role was one of the things we agreed on with him from the beginning. We really wanted to put Lelia in the picture. She's so important. And she's had an artistic role and also a role into the conception of every work Sebastião does through the years is always very conceptualized, and they think this through together. And so Lelia was very important. It was really something that we had to say. And in terms of our relationship, it changed a lot for the film, and it started actually with very important moments. The first thing we did together was going to Amazonia. At the end of the film, the Zoe tribe, where the women are so important. That's actually the first trip we did. Sebastian insisted a lot for me to go with him, and I was very, very scared. For those who like cinema, I was afraid that we would leave a Werner Herzog, Klaus Kinski situation. You know, like terrible, terrible. One of us would die in the process of making the film. And so I resisted a lot, but Sebastian had this talent, you know, to actually just hold me by the tip of my finger and turn it enough for me to, you know, okay, we'll go. So I went reluctantly, and but the Zoe are so nice, you know, they are so sweet, and the way they you know, relate to each other is so sweet. That their sweetness and their niceness contaminated us, and we behaved. But the turning point of the story is when we come back to Paris. I've been doing, you know, a documentary forever, and so I brought a camera with me, thinking that I might use those images when I'm 80 and Sebastian is 130, you know, and he's not bothering anymore. And so I filmed him, and coming back to Paris, I edited those pictures, and I showed the pictures to Sebastian. And that's when this thing happened. Sebastian is watching the way that his son sees him. You know, when you film someone, it says much more about the person that's filming than about the person who is being filmed. And of course, Sebastian is educated, he knows about images, and he sees my gaze over him, he gets very touched, starts crying, he can't speak anymore. I understand immediately what's happening. Me too, I get very, very touched. And our relationship started changing at this point. That's when I decided to travel with him somewhere. But it didn't sort things out completely. Things got sorted when, a long time after, I saw those scenes that Wim had filmed, edited. And it's weird because it's very familiar to me, all these things. I grew up listening to those images, to those stories. And actually, as a matter of fact, they chose, you know, the photos, so they would tell, you know, the story. It was very, very thought through, all the process of selecting the pictures he would speak about. But watching it with the distance, through somebody else's eyes, through that distance, it was enough for me to understand how much Sebastian had learned, had suffered, the toll, you know, he had to go through, and you know, in order to be able to make those experiences. That was very, very important to me, and I think I understood why he was the way he was when he came back from Ethiopia, from Rwanda, from other places. And I was in Berlin when we were editing the film. When I came back to Paris, this thing happened that we became friends instantly, you know. So I understood the problem was with me, well, too bad. But then, you know, that sorted things out, and it's really weird because it was immediately. So yes, it was a very transformative experience, as a matter of fact.
Question over here.
Thank you. I want to ask you, was the reception of your father's work in Brazil? And I mean, you mentioned that his work had an impact of European spheres and etc. But I wonder if you perceive any particular difference between the perception of his work in European context, and if so, how was the reception in contexts like Brazil or Africa, for instance? And if you can just speculate a little bit on how his feelings about these different perceptions was. Thank you.
The perception of Sebastian's work in Brazil is very, there's two different perceptions actually. There's one perception is that Brazilians are very proud that someone got very famous and he's Brazilian, and so it's a national pride. It's like Ayrton Senna at some point, not as big, but there's something, you know, of a national pride that there's a famous photographer that is Brazilian. And there's something else that's actually more deep and more important. When Sebastian came back to Brazil, he started working with people that came from the liberation theology, and that left church, and that were working with the landless peasant movements. And he worked a lot with them, and they were victim of you know, massacres, and during the after the dictatorship up to late 80s, early 90s, you know, there was a lot of tension around lands and around the issues, you know, raised by the landless peasants movement. And Sebastião really engaged himself with them. He edited a book that he did in collaboration with a very famous Portuguese writer, Saramago, and with a Brazilian singer, Chico Buarque. And they did this book called Terra, with Sebastião's photographies, and mostly Sebastião's photographies, actually. And this book was broadly sold in Brazil and elsewhere. And Sebastião donated all the money from the book, the rights of the photos, to the landless peasant movement. And they built a university. They have a university now with this money. So he's very much engaged, actually, with all those movements. And so this is the other perception, but it's not. It's funny because that's real and concrete, and that's a real engagement of his part. But actually, the main perception is still, you know, the fetish thing of having someone famous, you know, who made it, you know, outside. So yeah, it's ambiguous.
You've made it amazing. You've honored these photographs, but what I think is so striking about it is that it's not just a very static film which represents the photograph as a work of art. I was wondering, since the temptation to just go with very long takes to appreciate the photographs, what kinds of creative decisions did you have to make in order to, in effect, celebrate the photograph and yet make it a film, not just a series of images? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, the danger of this film was actually that it would be a photographer's film, you know, very static. But very from the beginning, it was very clear that the film had to have a story, a dramaturgy, and the fact we were going to rely on Sebastião's recollection, his experiences, was going to build that. You know, it was going to play on several levels at the same time. We would understand how the young man learns how to travel, how he confronts with people, how his camera works as a mediator, for those relations to be even richer, how he finds a role for his photographies, and so on and so forth. He goes too far, has to reinvent himself. So there was this story, personal story. There was also the story of each person he would meet, and we were going to speak about, and the political and geopolitical context of the photos, right? So there was always a lot of stories to speak about. And that was mainly what was guiding the way we were editing the film and what was making the film move forward. But as a matter of fact, the way you watch a photography is very dynamic. It's different from the way you see a film, but when you see a photo, you will focus on you know, what seems to be the most important, you know, the focal point of the photography. And then you'll start watching the peripheral points, and usually if the photo is well done and if it's complex, the meaning of the photography will transform as you're watching it. And if you're also listening to the stories of the people in the photo, then suddenly there's even more meaning and even more, you know, dynamic into it. So we were never really worried that the photo would be static, because we knew that it was actually very, very, very dynamic. I don't know if you have the feeling it's slow or if it's quick.
No, that's why I was so impressed by it. I mean, but at the same token, it wasn't just a montage of still images. I mean, you really were able to appreciate the individual image. Your eye was able to move and go and search for things within the image. But I never felt like you were hanging on too long. The takes were too long.
Well, we actually edited the movie for a year and a half. So at some point it was too slow or too quick, you know. We got and we with time, you know, we actually got to get all those sequences with, you know, a length that was, you know, that would work with the flow of the with what Sebastião was saying. So, but that really was the main issue was how we would convey the stories. You can see the photos in books and newsreels, but you never heard those stories, which are really, really important. And so we really based the film on those, actually. And we never considered to make a film about the photographer. we were really making a film about a witness. And the idea, although it's really putting Sebastian on a statue, it really does that, but the idea was not to celebrate an artist, it was really to transmit those experiences. And because it's cinema, it's telling his story, and it's shaped, in a way that functions for cinema. But the main idea was really the transmission of the experiences and the humanity, and the fact that Sebastian has this horizontal way of watching people. He's never judging, and this allows you to break the distance and connect with people that are very, very different, actually.
A question here in the middle.
Thank you very much. It's a magnificent film. Did your grandfather see the rebirth of the forest?
That's an interesting question. My grandfather died in, I think it's 2001. Right at the beginning of the plantings of the trees. And he thought, pretty much like the other farmers of the region, that this was a very, very stupid idea. That, it was a waste of money, planting trees that would produce absolutely nothing. He also felt that this very productive land that you can see, is being wasted as well. That's a capital, and so his way of seeing was antique, really, literally, antique. So unfortunately, he didn't see the forests growing, and but now, 20 years after, most people have understood, the point in planting trees. There was a project of planting trees all over. You know the river that passes in front of the farm, the institute? There was a massive catastrophe that happened to it a few months ago. The dam that broke in Minas Gerais, it broke on that river. And actually, for those who don't know about that, what happened is that it liberated a flow of mud full of metal. And this metal oxidates in the water and robbed all the oxygen and killed absolutely every living thing, in the course of this huge river. So the river is dead now. It's a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe. But the solution for saving this river along the years will be to use the technology that has been implemented in the Terra Institute, replanting trees in every single water sources. So luckily there is that, but there's still a fight to manage, to liberate the funds, to have there's a fight over the funds, what should these funds be applied for. A lot of politicians trying to use this to actually distribute money and buy votes, and so we don't really know what's going to happen, but we hope, we're going to be able to plant. It's about 100,000 water sources. So it's 300,000 water sources, and they will be planting about 100 million trees over the next 20 years. It's huge, it's a massive thing. But now this project existed already, last year. And it was supposed to be a project for, revitalization. Yeah, that. And now it's for survival. So it's actually very sad what's happening. And luckily, there is this technology, now that could be used for that. So we hope we're going to manage to do so.
A question here from Anton.
Hello. Congratulations for that beautiful film, and thank you very much for it. I'd like to ask this question of your experience. How did you, or do you as an artist, negotiate between that aesthetic beauty and the horrific content of what you were showing? And also, because it was the way your film was, the narrative of your film was going, between that caught moment of the photograph and then making it live again and flow through the film as a narrative rhythm or the narrative flow?
Anton, can you be more precise on the second question, which I'm not sure I got it?
The tension between the moment of the caught moment in the camera, of the photograph, and then how, because you want to make it live again and move, you know, with your camera as you're going through the narrative of the film. How can you tell us a bit more about your experience of negotiating those tensions between the moment and the flow and the horrific content and the beauty of the photograph?
I'll start with that, actually. The thing is, we decided to show absolutely everything. So that was a choice Vim and I made really quickly and very early in the film. We felt that we felt very secure that we could actually show very hard photos, and there's very, very hard stuff in this film. We felt secure because of the need to inform, because of the way Sebastian had done these images that were actually very respectful, although very hard. And so we were very confident we could show it. There is actually a controversy about Sebastian's photographs. It goes pretty much along the lines of, there are several controversies actually, but the main one is, should one make beautiful pictures about a terrible situation? And I think it's a fair question, actually. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make this film and give Sebastian the possibility of speaking was to understand what his motivators were, and how he works, and how respectful of the people that he will photograph he has been when he was in those places and in those terrible moments. And it was very important because I think it, when you understand that Sebastian is photographing this bond he creates with people, this intimacy, this human bond, that he's fulfilling this role of bringing an information out, but also allowing, you know, the voices of the people that usually don't have a voice to exist. That he's playing this role, I think it gives the photo a completely different take. And as Wim says, you know, you can, the debate actually is not about making a good photo or a bad photo. It's whether you should be able to make photos of such events and whether you should be able to speak about them or not. Because when you send a photographer somewhere, you hope that he will make the best possible photo, which is actually what everyone else does as well. So on my point of view is that if there was such a controversy about Sebastian's photos, it's because, that's something we spoke about this morning, it's because he doesn't respect the codes of the genre of photojournalism. He's not there just fact-checking and information illustrating. He's actually bringing this intimate relationship into the photo. And when you see the photo, the first thing you see is not the fact that it's supposed to illustrate, it's the person that's there through the emotional impact the relationship had on Sebastian, through what's in the picture, you know, that emotion that Sebastian was feeling at this time. So it's very hard to protect from these pictures. And when you realize that you're watching a picture that's actually about a terrible fact, well, it's too late. You've been drawn into it, and it's very difficult to protect. And I think that's been, you know, a big, for a lot of people, it's very, very hard, either because there is a guilt complex of not being there and not being someone who suffers, or there is just the idea that you don't want to watch through these things and you don't want to know, you don't need to know. But either ways, I think this is what makes these photos being, you know, so harshly criticized, in my opinion. So that's not a question you asked, but I thought, you know, that's a good moment to speak about it. Now, in terms of the narrative of the film, to jump on something that's completely different, we knew the important things were those recollections of Sebastian and everything he says during the journeys and the reportage. And then, in order to make the journey possible, I don't know if you realize, by half an hour into the film, Sebastian starts speaking about Ethiopia, gets into those very essential experiences. And by this point, it's him up to the end of the film. Him comes back one or two times to give very factual informations, make the film go forward, but it's meaningless. It's really Sebastian that speaks up to the end. And the first half hour are heavily introduced by Wim, by me. And actually, what we realized was, in terms of the filmmaking experience, that in order for us as an audience to accompany Sebastian, to accept what he had to say in those essential and terrible moments, we needed to know him and to have accepted who he is and where he comes from and in what sort of mind he is when he's making those photos. And so this is what this first half hour is about. It's about creating a character that's very close to the real man. Of course, he's more complex than that, you know. But the idea was to introduce him so he could be accepted, and so you could feel secure to go with him into Ethiopia and you know and accept what was going to come afterwards. So this is how the film was built. It was built backwards completely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
Probably speak up. I can speak up. So, just a question about a very small detail. So, I'm Portuguese myself, and I noticed the guy. Sebastião, towards the beginning, was singing Feitio de Oração. You know the Brazilian song?
Sorry, okay.
Feitio de Oração.
Yeah.
He was singing it in the beginning. And if you know the lyric, it's beautiful, and it's very appropriate. And I was wondering if that was intentional.
Sebastian always sings when he photographs. At first, when now he photographs with digital pictures, and but before he would photograph with analog, you know, and you had to rewind the roll, not to be able to change it, and because he's photographing this relationship, and there is something happening between him and the person, and he starts making the photo, and there's actually an exchange going on there. When he would rewind, it would break this, because it was, you know, a cut into the moments, you know. And so he started singing in order to actually keep this happening while he was rewinding. And he's always singing, you know. When you film him, it's even difficult to edit, because sometime in the film he starts a song and he keeps singing another one, and you know. But yeah, he sings a lot.
So it was not intentional.
So no, it's not. No.
It's a song about that is to live through a passion, and then once you do that, you can enjoy the video. So I thought that was very important. I was saying the song says something about living through a passion, and only then can you enjoy the beauty of things. So I thought it could have been intentional.
Juliano, we'd like to thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Good to see you again soon.